For several months now, the entire world has had the opportunity to observe the way that the United States has been continuing to deliberately foment tensions around the friendly nation of Venezuela under the pretext of combating drug trafficking and the terrorist threat. Illegally destroying at the same time the civilian vessels in the Caribbean Sea. It seems that the White House decided to remove from the mothballs the previously embraced practice of portraying combating terrorism as justification for blatant aggression and intervention in the affairs of sovereign states. And this time, the so-called foreign terrorist organization has been labeled as being the legitimate government. Their attempts to convince us all of the mendacious view that decision of the U.S. authorities alone is enough in order to transform a sovereign state into a criminal enterprise, any acts of force against which can now be called a law enforcement operation and the defense of national interests. We see no point in delving on the absurd nature of the U.S. pseudo-legal methods, given how significantly they fly in the face of international law and are inconsistent, especially given that in Washington themselves have sincerely recognized this. The statement of the U.S. President on the 16th of December does not need any additional interpretation. This is a direct claim on the natural wealth and the soil of another state, and an open, if not to state, flagrant bringing to bear of military, political, and economic pressure with the aim of changing an inconvenient regime. So this intervention, which is unfolding, can become a template for future acts of force against Latin American states in accordance with the so-called Trump corollary and the Monroe Doctrine, which was enshrined in the recently published U.S. national security policy.
The U.S. actions and the rhetoric have led to continued tensions in the region, raising serious concerns among regional countries and the international community. The UN Charter establishes fundamental principles governing international relations, including sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes. They constitute the cornerstone of international rule of law and are crucial for maintaining world peace and security. The U.S. actions seriously infringe upon other countries' sovereignty, security, and legitimate rights and interests, gravely violate the UN Charter and the international law, and threaten peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean. We call on the United States to heed the just call of the international community, immediately halt relevant actions, and avoid further escalation of tensions. We urge the United States to uphold the navigation safety of regional countries and the freedom and rights they enjoy under international law, to conduct normal law enforcement and judicial cooperation under bilateral and multilateral legal frameworks, to lift illicit unilateral sanctions, and to do more to promote peace, stability, and development in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Let me begin by stating and reiterating the United States does not recognize Nicolas Maduro or his cronies as the legitimate government of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is a fugitive from American justice and the head of the foreign terrorist organization Cartel de los Soles. In fact, Maduro and his regime stole the election, and the international community has the receipts. President Trump has been very clear that he is going to use the full power of the United States of America, the full might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels which have operated with impunity in our hemisphere for far too long, and everyone knows it. The single most serious threat to this hemisphere, our very own neighborhood, and the United States, is from transnational terrorists and criminal groups. These cartels are not like the mafia. These cartels are sophisticated, very technically capable, well-financed, and are wreaking havoc in our region. In its own 2025 World Drug Report, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime identified Venezuela as the key trafficking route in the entire Western Hemisphere for illegal drugs. And for illegal narcotics and materials entering the United States and increasingly Europe. The United States will impose and enforce sanctions to the maximum extent to deprive Maduro of the resources he uses to fund Cartel de los Soles, which the United States has designated as a foreign terrorist organization along with Tren de Aragua. Important to this council meeting today, this includes profits from the sale of oil used to finance these cartels. The reality of the situation is that sanctioned oil tankers operate as the primary economic lifeline for Maduro and his illegitimate regime. The sanctioned tankers also fund the narco-terrorist group Cartel de los Soles. Maduro is responsible for trafficking, using these resources and using these profits into both the United States and Europe. And one has to ask, why have sanctions, either bilaterally, unilaterally, or backed by the international community, if they're not enforced? Well, the United States under President Trump is enforcing them in international waters. Otherwise, they are just empty words. Further, not only does Maduro's illegitimate regime openly cooperate and fund terrorist and criminal organizations, but it invites terrorist groups like Hezbollah, like the Iranian regime, militias like the ELN and FARC dissidents to operate openly within their territory, unimpeded and unencumbered. Maduro's ability to sell Venezuela's oil enables his fraudulent claim to power and his narco-terrorist activities. The people of Venezuela, frankly, deserve better. These people who have suffered under Maduro's socialist dictatorship. It is the action and policies of the illegitimate Maduro regime that pose an extraordinary threat to our hemisphere's peace and stability, and to that of the United States. The bottom line is whether it is physical attacks on our buildings and infrastructure, like we suffered on 9/11, or hybrid attacks, like flooding our country with criminals and deadly chemicals, the United States will do everything in our considerable power to protect our hemisphere, our borders, and the American people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, one of the countries sitting at this table has publicly stated that it wants to annex our country. On the 16th of December, its president demanded that we immediately hand over our land, our oil, and our minerals because they supposedly belong to them. He said that if we did not comply with his ultimatum, he would unleash the fury of the greatest navy in history on our country. Mr. President, we are in the presence of a power that acts outside of international law, demanding that Venezuelans vacate our country and hand over our Orinoco River, our Lake Maracaibo, our Margarita Island, our beaches, rivers, plains, and mountains. Otherwise, he will carry out an armed attack, which he has been announcing for weeks. This is the greatest extortion known in our history, a gigantic crime of aggression in progress, beyond all rational parameters, all legal logic, all historical precedent. But it's not just about Venezuela. The ambition is continental. The U.S. government has expressed this in its national security strategy, which states that the future of the continent belongs to them, with the enactment of the Monroe Doctrine in the 21st century now aggravated by the Trump corollary. Our liberator Simon Bolivar warned of this more than 200 years ago when he said, and I quote, that the United States seemed to be destined by Providence to plague Latin America with misery in the name of liberty, end of quote. We want to alert the world. Venezuela is only the first target of a larger plan. The U.S. government wants us to be divided so it can conquer us piece by piece. The United States, which was an indispensable country in the construction of the United Nations and in the drafting of its founding charter, has today become an actor that seeks to impose itself on the fundamental rights of all states in the Western Hemisphere, even at the cost of destroying the UN. We have requested this meeting, aware that the U.S. government will not allow this body to adopt a decision that would put a stop to its sinister plan. The world should know that last November, the U.S. government was the only one that prevented an agreement in the Security Council to condemn attacks against civilians on the high seas and to call for détente, dialogue, and diplomacy. The U.S. government is preventing the Security Council from fulfilling its mandate. If in 1945 that country was a force for good, today it has become a state that threatens international law and peace and security. The world must know that the threat is not Venezuela. The threat is the current U.S. government. Mr. President, the murders in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean carried out by the U.S. government of the last few months are the first evidence of its plan to impose its power in the region in flagrant violation of international law and human rights. There have been more than 29 attacks resulting in more than 101 victims, non-combatant civilians, in the absence of armed conflict, who were coldly murdered, violating their right to the presumption of innocence and due process. Let it be clear once and for all that there is no war in the Caribbean. There is no international armed conflict, nor is there a non-international one, which is why it is absurd for the U.S. government to seek to justify its actions by applying the rules of war.